available, what we be looking at. And the idea is to seed some ideas, so tools, resources, and things that potential working group on responsible use of OpenDP could then use in future discussions. So we would like to identify analytical frameworks that would be useful for this working group, available best practices, and research questions and open problems that would be a good starting point for this working group to pick up. And this is our outline for this session today. We'll give a brief level setting presentation on some of the frameworks that we've been thinking about that might be relevant to this working group. And then we'll move on to an individual exercise. And then we'll share out some of our reflections from the individual exercise. Then we'll move into small group brainstorming and a stakeholder mapping exercise. And then we'll share out from the group.
So we're going to just go over quickly a few frameworks for privacy and ethics that could just be helpful for our discussion. Of course, there are a lot more than this, but we're going to go over some of the more philosophical side and then the concrete ethical frameworks that are helpful. So kind of to start, my perspective very much comes from science and technology studies, where we really think about technology as deeply embedded in the social and the political. And what does this mean? So technology as a social artifact, one way you can think of this, coming from the social construction of technology literature, is that technological development is shaped by social groups. And the paths of development are not inevitable. You can think of this with a lot of the discourse around generative AI. Seems like, okay, this is just how technology is shaping our world, but also our acceptance of the technology shapes its development. And closure, which means kind of consensus around different stabilizations or formations of technology, is negotiated by the different social groups involved. And I think this community meeting is a really great example of how we can kind of try to shape closure around differential privacy in ways that make sense, both for researchers and industry deployments, but also for the greater social good. And then in terms of technology being political, here we're thinking about political as not, say, political, but in terms of how does technology shape arrangements of power in both big and small ways. And so there's a great article by Lyndon Winner, which talks about two ways this can happen. One is that technical devices can be ways of settling an issue. This is very apparent when we think about algorithmic governance in different settings. And a different way you can think about technology being political is that the technology itself is strongly compatible with different kinds of political relationships. So systems like nuclear systems, you need someone in command to make that kind of decision, whereas other technologies might be more compatible with democratic government. Now, moving more specifically to privacy technologies, how can we think about what this means in terms of the social and political? And one really helpful framework here is social integrity, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which talks about different contexts and information flows in these different contexts, say healthcare or government or academic contexts, and norms in these different contexts that support specific goals and values, such as in healthcare, maybe our ideal goal would be to support patient care, and the norms of the different information flows should support these kinds of goals. And to define privacy, contextual integrity takes this as privacy is a flow of information that is appropriate to the context and follows the norms of the context and adheres to the goals of the context. And so using contextual integrity starts with these three stages of trying to understand what are the goals and values, what are the norms of information flows, and how does technology disrupt these norms? Evaluating, do these disruptions support the goals and values? And then using these analytical steps to prescribe whether the technology should be abandoned or changed. And one of the things I'd love for this group to think about is differential privacy being responsible in different use cases, really thinking about the context, what are the goals, what are the norms, and how does differential privacy disrupt these norms or support them? And how can we think about that as a way to connect the technology of differential privacy with privacy as a more holistic and social concept?
There's also a body of work to standardize practices around carrying out privacy assessments and designing governance programs and data management plans within different contexts. So the NIST privacy framework is an example of a framework for structuring a privacy analysis and being very systematic at each stage of the life cycle, determining what are the different risks and what tools may be available to address those risks. And another set of guidelines comes from the body of work around developing ethics for statistical practice. And so this is an example from the American Statistical Association, where they think explicitly about responsibilities to different stakeholder groups, whether that's the research subjects, members of your research team, or other statisticians, and think of the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders, like employers. And in the Privacy Tools Project, we've applied some frameworks, including various tools from information science to guide the selection of different combinations of security and privacy controls based on the identifiability and sensitivity of information. In this framework, we've conceptualized different ways of thinking about when you can use differential privacy on its own, or when you should combine differential privacy with additional layers of controls, such as notice and consent, or seeking IRB approval, oversight of using data use agreement or secure data enclave. And in this way, that we've been thinking about very practical recommendations about how to design a differentially private system.
So that was just a quick overview of the, some different ways to think about responsible use of DP in relation to these different frameworks. And just wanted to kind of throw that at you before we go on to the exercises. So the first exercise we'd love for you to do is look at the first worksheet in front of you on the individual exercise, and take 5 minutes to think about, what would you consider to be a worst case scenario for a real world implementation of DP or deployment of OpenDP, and what is your vision of a best case implementation? And kind of fleshing that out more will really help us get started with this discussion.